Okay, super happy to be here at the Cloud Engineering Summit. My name's Steve Jaguar. It should show up down there. I'm a developer advocate for Bridgecrew. More about that in a moment, but let's get cracking with the subject. All right, I am going to be securing an Nginx deployment for Kubernetes using Checkov, which is an open source infrastructure as code scanner, and I'm gonna try to explain why that is. Like, what was my challenge when I first started this? That is, I needed a website. This is a real challenge for my Twitch show. Uh, I was going to host it on a Raspberry Pi. There's all sorts of challenges I've already got here, right? And it seemed obvious to use Nginx. The big problem I had was really just trying not to look like a total idiot because I work for a security company that specializes in infrastructure as code security, and I have a history in cloud native security, but that's what the show is about. So it would be horrible, giant facepalm moment if I didn't pass our own Checkov YAML scan. So, and it was insecure. That would be bad. So, a little bit more about me. I'm a developer advocate for Bridgecrew. I'm a Raspberry Pi geek. I like DevSecOps. I've worked for a bunch of places that focus on security, and that's that Twitch show I was talking about. You can learn more about me at my website. Yeah, there we go. All right, so this is kind of some of the motivation. I guess it's fair to say that Nginx is popular, and if you look up there, 18 million live deployments that seem active. Not all of them are containerized, of course. Not all of them maybe on Kubernetes. Maybe that first one is, it's on DigitalOcean. But it just kind of shows that if there's a weakness, some baddie out there or the bot is going to find it. So I kind of feel like we should do best efforts. If you don't know what Shodan is like DuckDuckGo, but looking for all the stuff you can't see. So it's used by researchers and baddies alike for good and bad things. So the problem with Nginx, if compromised, what could I do, right? Well, if I took a look at the image itself, just the default image, just pulling Nginx, right? Not specifying tags, just seeing what happened. I jumped in there and it's got some things that, if you're unfamiliar with NSEnter, allows me to execute commands in namespaces other than like Linux namespaces other than my own. It's kind of bad. It was an attack vector for a while, and thankfully there are things in place to stop that being useful. Curl is there. So if there's not anything, I basically have everything. If I have curl, I can get anything that I might be missing from an attack perspective, or I can install it. So, and there's loads there. What was weird though, I noticed, is that there was no PS. So I thought, well, whatever. I can get around that. So what I can do, the image can, as a result, I can enumerate the network, I can enumerate environment, I can even break out to the host. Recently, there was this CVE that was announced, 2021-22 555, that has an exploit that you can run and exploits a out of bounds write that pops you out into root. I tried it. It does a bunch of stuff. If you get it wrong, you can actually crash the underlying node and you do all sorts of stuff with it. So interesting. And of course, I'm on an Nginx server, so I can serve malicious content. I have control over what is being sent to other people. So that's bad. So I think we've established, let's just go to our happy place for a moment and let's get going. What's the plan? Well, step one, of course, was go get Nginx. I was going to do that in a containerized form. And I was actually interested recently to see that it hit number one. So I saw this graph in an article about 3 months ago, and they were saying, oh, look, Nginx is almost more popular than Apache. And hey, look at that. As of about June, it is. Cool. I'm going to wrap it in a Kubernetes deployment. So where do I get started? This is where I put on my newbie hat and I thought, what would somebody do if they wanted to create a web server and from scratch and they wanted to put it into Kubernetes? Well, they'd probably search, I would imagine, Google or DuckDuckGo. It doesn't really matter. You get slightly different results. And so we can do that. I can click that and it's going to bring up search. And there's lots of ads. Okay. Some articles that are a little bit more Nginx focused. App Protect, sure, great, a lot of videos. But oh, there's the blog actually. There's the blog that SEO works. How about that? That this talk is based on. But as I went down, the first time I actually got some actual code was here. So that was a live search, and it's still Still there, connecting applications with services. This is Kubernetes.io documentation. That was the link I had there just in case. And here's where I get my deployment. And then down here, I've got an example of how to create a service to connect it. Now, it serves that somebody might just cut and paste that and go, well, there's my starting point. And I thought, well, that's what I'll do. I'll just cut and paste that. Seems good, right? So the next step was to check that it's secure. Can I use the default image? Is it secure? Do I need to make changes to it? Do I need to make changes after I look at the deployment? Are my defaults and my deployment secure? That is pretty much step one of securing things. So what does secure mean? When I say secure, I'm talking about, I'm going to make a pretty old school, almost InfoSec reference to the CIA, what they call the triad of security, which when I say triad, it always sounds a bit weird, but confidentiality, integrity, and availability, generally whatever it is you're doing can fall into these categories. I loosely here tried to map it to something that was a bit more cloud native or Kubernetes-y, and said, all right, least privilege, immutability, and resilience. That roughly summarizes what I'm after in terms of security in Kubernetes. And I tried to break everything down that what we're going to see in a moment. Now, my tool of choice, other tools are available, was Checkov. I would be remiss if I didn't say I work at Bridgecrew, so obviously I use Checkov. But independent of that, I used to use it. I think it's good. It's got lots of checks. It works for Kubernetes. I can also use it for Terraform and a bunch of other stuff, right? It covers most infrastructure as code languages, so why not? And it's got a VS Code plugin. It's got all the stuff. Great. So I'm going to talk about least privilege in a moment, but just before I do that, I'm going to flick over here and I'm going to show you what I've got here. So I've got I've taken that Nginx, and here it is. This is exactly straight out of what we just saw on the Kubernetes docs. And over here, I can scan it with Checkov. So I can type compact and quiet, just makes it easier to read on the screen. And I'm going to pick out the nginx.yaml, and I can see what I've got wrong. Now, what it's going to do is not show you the things I've passed. We don't really care about that. That would be a whole other presentation to see what we did there. And I've got a few things, right? Specifically about, I think it's 20 things that were wrong of 90 things that it checked. 70 out of 90 sounds like a good score on a test, but in security, maybe not right. And we can see making sure that I have a seccomp profile. I'll get into wigh that is. A high UID to avoid host conflicts, making sure I have a security context. That's one I always have an issue with. There's never a security context in there by default. And that says, well, I'm going to apply something that looks secure and you can take things away afterwards. We don't do that. We have a tendency to just give lots of examples that are technically insecure by default or easy by default so that we ease the friction of adoption. But I think we can probably start changing that these days. Some stuff that you might not know about, like ensuring service account tokens are only mounted where necessary. You might think, really? Is my service account token mounted? I didn't do that. Yeah, it is. If you don't say not to, it is. Namespace, all of these things. I've gone through all of these. Memory limits, CPU and memory limits and requests are like the number one always missing, because there's a bit of a paradox there. How do you know what there should be? And then an interesting one about using digests. So let's go back, and I've summarized a lot of these and I've categorized them. Adding that seccomp profile. You'd be surprised how important that is and how rarely it is done. It disables a ton of 44 system calls. I likened it to the Expelliarmus Harry Potter spell, getting rid of disarming your opponent. Mount ptrace, rebooting the host, changing the namespace, the Linux namespace. There's a bunch we talked about NSEnter earlier. Quota-CTL, messing with CPU limits, all sorts of stuff. There's tons of stuff that just gets rid of, and that you don't need to be a white hat hacker to look at that and go, yeah, I don't want any new. I don't want any of that stuff. And it's a great default defense in depth. Like a lot of these features it doubles up when you remove capabilities like capsysadmin. But why not? If I can add a one-liner that does this for me, Of course, I'm going to do that, right? So that's right off the beginning. We can do that very quickly. Set the allow privilege escalation to false. You're probably thinking, of course, why would I want to do that? Might be a surprise to you to learn that ping uses that. So you'll be disabling ping. Why do you need ping in a container? Most of the things you might want to use that this would disable are debugging related. So understanding that, like sudo, for example, anything that's set UID, you won't be able to use anymore. So keep that in mind, but it still should be a default. Don't run as root. And assign an appropriate user and group ID. Now that might be harder than you think, and I'm going to show you how I did that, because Nginx by default was running, I think it was running on UID and GID 101, which is really low and actually can conflict with other things. So I had to push that out, and I had to do some tinkering in the Docker file to make that happen. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Drop all capabilities. We'll see that in a moment. You don't have to know the capabilities. You can just say drop -all, and then I feel like 9 times out of 10, nothing will break, and that's good, right? Then you can start investigating and learning what capabilities you need after the fact. Too often, back in the old days, people would actually run as privileged, which gave you all that stuff, keys to the kingdom, or they would add all just because they didn't want to sort it all out. So -all is the good way to say least privilege. We'll talk about immutability. A read-only file system. That sounds good. Why do I need to write to the file system? Typically, containers are considered to be immutable by default. Well, in my case, actually, I'm running a web server that needs to do some caching and have a temp file, so I do need to find a way to be mostly read-only at the very least, and we'll look at that. Unmount that service account token. If you don't specify what service account you're using, it will use the default service account. And if an attacker gets in there and can get the token associated with that account, then they can impersonate that service account and abuse the Kubernetes REST APIs from within there, which means they can start messing with all sorts of stuff. So if you don't need it, which quite often you don't, one line gets rid of that. One line security. That's what we like. Avoid supply chain attacks. This was the best image I can find. Sorry about that. It's kind of gross, but when we're talking about what images we're using, we often know, a lot of us know that we shouldn't use latest, right? And then we start using, for example, in Nginx, I would use 1.21. Maybe that's one of the latest ones. But that still can be a problem from a supply chain attack perspective, because if I get hold of the build environment, the CI, I can build a malicious version of this. I can push it into its destination, and I just tag it again with 1.21. Now the SHA, the digest will change, but if I'm just using the tag, I'm vulnerable, right? So let's be diligent and use the tag, and we'll see how to do that. It's not hard. You can even do it in CI. You don't have to go manually do anything. It's not a lot of extra work. Okay, resilience. This is one of the things that is often, well, I would even say easily avoided. I mean, understanding what readiness and liveness probes you need, this can be hard. It's not always totally clear what commands will do what. But if you can come up with those, letting Kubernetes know you're alive and you're ready is great, because it'll help you stay alive, and it'll help that make sure your availability is high. In the case of Nginx, it's actually not that hard. So we'll see what that looks like shortly. CPU and memory requests and limits. Again, it's like a chicken or egg scenario. What should they be? If I don't know what they are, how can I set them before I start deploying? But the reality is you can come up with sensible limits. It's really quite important to have requests in there, because more than just requesting a piece of CPU and memory, Kubernetes looks at that as how much of the pie do you want in comparison with other running pods on this node. So it's more than just me. It's about working as a team with other pods on the node. So I will put some sensible defaults in there for Nginx, and we'll see what those look like. Okay, so let's do it. Let's apply all of these security controls to our Nginx and see if we can get a clean slate on Checkov. That would be awesome. So low-hanging fruit out of the box would be here. I can just add my namespace. Yeah, I'm going to call it Cloud Edge Summit, and I really should add it here as well. So let's add it in there. That'll give me some low-hanging fruit out of the box. Can I add resources right now? Let's do that. So let's do it in that order. That is associated with my container. So let's add some space there. And let's add some default resources. Cool. Let's talk a little bit about those. So I've got my limits of 1 CPU and 0.5 CPUs. Maybe that's a little bit much, but I'm not running anything else on this one node, so this should be fine. And I know that memory is pretty reasonable, but I can scale this way down if I wanted to. And it doesn't really matter as long as I have something in there that is my portion of what we want, right? I might leave my limits really high and my requests really low at the start, just to be absolutely certain that I am recognized and I am part of the team, right? So that's a perfectly reasonable starting point, just as long as it's there. What I can do afterwards is I can use metric server and I can do a top and I can see what I'm actually using and I can create a buffer plus or minus around that. That is what I really want to do, but let's not leave it blank to start. Great. So seeing as I'm on resilience right now, let me add the probes and you can see what those look like. Okay. Probably think I'm the fastest typer in the world, right? I've worked out these beforehand and I actually programmed them into my Stream Deck. So on my liveness probe, I'm just checking to see the Nginx process is live and running, and I'm doing that at a reasonable cadence. And my readiness, well, this is kind of, is it actually serving up some of my website? You'll see I've got 8080 here. And actually, I'm going to go back, and this isn't something that is being checked for, and I think it might result in a new rule, is that sharing a kind of a system level port directly from the pod isn't necessarily great. I should be doing that from the service down here. So I should have a target port in there, and that would make a lot more sense. But we'll do that after. So that adds up. So there we go. I've got that done now. Now let's just do another check, right? So I was at 20. What am I at now? Hopefully maybe like 16 or something. That'd be already good progress, right? A lot of these CPU limits ones, like there's tons of them, they're going to go away. I'm not on one page yet. Darn, I was kind of hoping I was, but I got 12. Okay, that's not bad. Security context, when I add that, is really going to take care of a lot of this. I've already said this. It kind of upsets me. No, it doesn't upset me, but I think we don't add security context by default often enough. And it is confusing, definitely, because there's two different security contexts. There's the one for the pod itself, and then there's the one for the container. So if we're looking at, for example, the pod, let's do that, right? Let's pop this here. So here's the security context for the whole, by default, this will be for all containers. So I can have multiple containers in a pod, we know that. I'm going to run as non-root, which is important, right? Maybe I'm already running as non-root, but to specify it to Kubernetes is important. I'm going to run as user 10,014 and group 10,014. Now you might be thinking, how on earth is he doing that? At the very end, I'll end by showing you what I did in the Docker file to make that happen. And I'm using the seccomp profile runtime default. See, that to me is a no-brainer because it does so much and I don't have to think, I don't have to make up a profile. I can just use Docker default or runtime default and I'm going to get a ton of good stuff from that. So just with that alone, if I save, there's nothing wrong with those defaults. Quite often, if you've already got a sensible user ID in your container, just add that information means that I've got a declarative definition of security in place. Almost on one page, I bet. 8 checks. We're on the edge. So we're going to add the other security context now, down within the container. So let's move down here and go after our probes. And we're going to pop it just there. All right, so what am I doing within the container itself? I'm establishing that it will have a read-only file system. This is good. This will cause me problems for Nginx, and I will show you how I overcome that. I've blocked allow privilege escalation, and I have dropped all capabilities, but I've been specific about net raw. Now, I don't necessarily think that's something you necessarily have to do because it's sort of redundant, But because I noticed that Chekhov has two checks, it checks for specifically for NetRaw and for all capabilities. I added them both just because I like to have a clean slate. And now we're going to be really close to the end. Yes. Service account tokens. Oh no, seccomp was covered. So the one-liner, that is also at the pod level. So let's go up to the top where we're doing our things for the pod. Let's pop it just here. And let's get rid of that service account. Automount service account token false. Awesome, right? And the last two were to do with the image. Look at that. How often do we see this? Like in lessons or tutorials, they just say kubectl run mypod -- image equals nginx. We're not encouraged often enough to have a tag or be specific about it, so much so that not until you get further down the line do you suddenly go, oh, this is bad. Like I have nothing here, which will default the latest, but I need to have something. If we go look at Docker Hub, we can see there's loads of tags. Here I've got all the tags present. We're going to have our latest. And there it is. And I can actually at a glance see that this image is already tagged multiple times. So it's tagged as mainline. I also happen to know that it's 1.21.3, which is one that I should really, if I was using tags and being specific, I would use this one here. But that's not really what I want to use. What I want to do is I want to come in here and I want to get this information here. And I want to put that in there. It is a slightly different format, but it does make sure that I'm always definitely use the same built image. It does go in there a little different. Normally you'd put colon, but in this case, you're going to put it in like that with an at SHA-256 and then colon version. So I think we're kind of there. That wasn't too painful. And if we're done, we're done. And then I'll end by showing you how to make it actually work, because I've got my clean slate, but it's now really a bit of a tick box exercise, because the reality is Nginx won't be able to write to the drive and it'll just crash loop, back off, fail. In order to make that happen, I do actually need to create some volumes. So I'm going to have to do this, create some empty dir volumes, and then immediately above it, mount those volumes. And those are the directories that I need. So I've just created some temporary space. I still have a read-only file system, and I've solved that problem where this is actually going to run now, which is great. And then finally, the last thing I had to do within my Docker file was do a little bit of jiggery pokery here. You can see I'm installing something called Shadow. The reason I've done that is because user mod and group mod don't exist in this Nginx Alpine. And that allowed me to change the Nginx's identity to a decent user ID and group ID. It does some of the permissions, but I took care of the rest of the permissions down here. And being a good boy, I then deleted Shadow afterwards. And that meant I was able to switch to user Nginx and work. So that is essentially all the different steps I took to secure this Nginx, which did take some time to work out, even though I just did that pretty quickly. So the key takeaways I want you to get from this is that finding secure examples sometimes can be really difficult. I have put all of this into a repo, which I should have put on here, but it's in my blog. So if you Google secure Nginx deployment, you'll find the blog and you'll find the repo where all of this stuff is. Basic best practices can be easy if you use tools. All of those errors that I found in Chekhov actually refer to documentation that points you to good suggestions and good best practices, or even to the Kubernetes documentation itself. So they're available. Know that many of the defaults aren't secure, and there is always an easy way to make that happen. All right, that's the end of this talk. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions. More information about Chekhov you can find at chekhov.io. Thank you very much.